I'm Virginia Ellis, 79 years old, and this Christmas, I walked into my daughter's house holding a velvet box with a bracelet inside and left with nothing but snow in my hair and her words ringing in my ears. "You're not family anymore," she said, right there on the porch in front of everyone. Her voice sharp, her face red, mine pale. I had bought the gift with a fifth of my pension, had chosen my dress with care, had even curled my hair. But none of it mattered. Not after she said that. Not after she slammed the door and locked it. I didn't drive away. Right then, I just sat in the car and watched the holiday lights flicker in her window, knowing something inside me had finally broken before I go any further. Let me know where you're listening from in the comments, and hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever walked away from someone you raised. Because they pushed you too far, they call me Old Virginia. And Oakler always have. I've lived in the same pale blue house on Maple Street for 54 years, and I've taken the same morning walk through town every day since my husband passed. Folks say you can check your watch by my routine, 6:30 sharp, even in the snow boots, laced coat, button scarf tucked I pass City Hall where I once balanced the books during a budget crisis, the courthouse where I once exposed a contractor for cooking the numbers, and Silas Clark's hardware store, whose grandfather used to handwrite my tax returns before the computers came along. These streets remember me, and I remember them. I started at Ellis Construction as a bookkeeper when I was 27, a widow with a toddler on my hip and no college degree. Just grit and an eye for numbers. I outlasted 3 bosses, 2 recessions, and 1 merger. And I was still catching errors in project bids the year I turned 70 after they closed the office. I kept the habits: work at sunrise, walk at dawn, coffee, black 2 sugars. The only thing that's changed is Rachel. My daughter was always quick with opinions, even when she was little. She'd fix me with those big eyes and say things like, "Why don't you wear dresses like the other moms?" or "Why don't we have a microwave like the Jeffersons down the street?" She wanted shiny. She wanted loud. She wanted everything. I couldn't give when she married Greg, a man who always looked like he'd just won a bet. It was like watching her step into a world I didn't belong to. His auto shop took off faster than I thought possible. Their house doubled in size before their mortgage was even dry, and their dinner parties always came with printed invitations and soft background jazz. Last Christmas, I sat in a corner chair while Greg gave a tour of their new wine cellar that cost more than my car this year. The invitation came again, same glossy cardstock. No signature, just a line at the bottom. "Please confirm attendance," as if I were a coworker, not a mother. I tucked the card into the same drawer where I keep the photos. Rachel at 5, missing her 2 front teeth. Rachel at 17, in the blue dress we found at a clearance rack. Rachel walking down the aisle, hand in hand with Greg, while I stood beside them, smiling with something cold in my chest. A few days before the dinner, I met my neighbor Lorna at the market. She saw the invitation sticking out of my purse and said, "You're too kind to them, after what happened last year." But I shook my head and told her, family is family, even if it no longer felt true. I bought Rachel a silver bracelet with amethysts, her favorite stone when she was a girl, even though she hasn't worn anything under $100 in years. I wrapped it in tissue and laid it on my dresser beside the burgundy dress I planned to wear. Something modest, but not frumpy. Something quiet, but presentable. So Greg wouldn't have a reason to joke, and Rachel wouldn't roll her eyes. The night before the dinner, Aiden Clark knocked on my door. He's the police chief now, but he used to sit on my porch eating lemon cookies with his dad, who was sheriff back when Oakler had fewer secrets than stop signs. We sat in the kitchen like old times, but his face was serious. He laid out some photos, cars stripped for parts, receipts from fake sales names that led straight to Greg's shop. He said he'd come to me first, out of respect. Said he could hold off the warrant until after Christmas, but not much longer. He asked me if I wanted to tell Rachel myself to give her time to prepare or to say goodbye in my own way. I asked him for 2 more days, just 2 days, to wear my dress, give my gift, sit through the dinner. Smile at the guests, pretend, for one last time, that family still meant something. I didn't know what would happen, but I knew I couldn't face the fallout without saying my own quiet goodbye. The morning of Christmas Eve started quietly. I brewed my usual pot of coffee and sat by the window in my robe watching the light snow settle on the porch railing. The gift for Rachel was already wrapped a silver bracelet with a row of amethysts tucked into a velvet box. My burgundy dress hung by the bedroom door ready for the evening. I had no appetite for breakfast, so I buttered a slice of toast, took 2 bites, and left the rest untouched. Around noon, I called Aiden. "Everything on track?" I asked. "So far," he said. "We've got patrols on standby, and the press is prepped. But nothing moves until you say so." "I'll let you know," I said and hung up. I spent the afternoon getting ready. I pressed my dress with a light hand, just enough to smooth the fabric. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened the small pearl earrings Robert had given me years ago. I combed my hair slowly, tying it back the way I used to for city council meetings. One last look in the mirror, then I stepped into the cold. The cab pulled up in front of Rachel and Greg's house just before 6. Their windows glowed with warm yellow light. I could hear laughter from inside muffled through the snow. A Christmas wreath hung on the door, oversized and perfectly symmetrical, like something out of a catalog. I held the bracelet in one hand and a bottle of wine in the other. When Rachel answered the door, she wore a red satin dress and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom," she said, "you're just in time. Come in." I stepped inside. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted turkey. About 15 people were already gathered in the living room. I recognized Dr. Harland from the clinic and his wife, and a few others Rachel had mentioned in passing. Greg stood by the fireplace, mid-conversation, glass in hand. When he spotted me, he raised his voice just enough for everyone to hear. "Well, there's my mother-in-law," he said, grinning. "Welcome to our humble home." I handed him the wine without a word. Rachel led me toward the dining area, pointing out people and offering names I barely caught. I nodded, made small talk, and kept my attention on a young man with a notepad who hadn't yet introduced himself. That had to be Reed Dalton, the reporter Aiden warned me about. Rachel leaned in close. "Mom," she whispered, "just try not to talk about your work tonight, okay? Some of the guests might not find it very engaging." I gave a small smile. "Of course, dear. I'm here for you." I stayed near the appetizers, picking at cheese cubes and olives, keeping my distance. Reed drifted closer after a while, offering a polite smile. "Mrs. Ellis," he said, "I'm Reed Dalton, Eau Claire Times. I heard from Chief Clark that you know more about this town than anyone else alive." "I've lived here a long time," I said. "Long enough to remember a lot." "I'm working on a story about small businesses," he said. "Greg's shop came up more than once. Rapid growth, impressive reach for a place this size. I was curious what you thought." "In business, there are many reasons success happens," I said, some of them hard to explain from the outside. He nodded slowly, studying me. "Still, I've noticed some odd things. Late hours, unmarked vehicles, cars coming in with no plates. Ever notice that I looked him in the eye and smiled?" "You'd have to ask Greg about that." "I've tried," he said, glancing toward the fireplace. "Not the most cooperative subject." "Mr. Dalton, I said it's Christmas Eve. Maybe save the business talk for another day." He raised both hands in apology. "Fair enough. Enjoy your evening, Mrs. Ellis." Dinner was served just past 8. The dining room was dressed to impress, white linen, crystal stemware, polished silver. Rachel and Greg took the seats at either end. I was placed midway down the table between Dr. Harland and his wife Judith. Across from me, Reed scribbled notes in his pad while sipping his drink. Greg's laughter grew louder with each refill. So Judith said, turning to me, Rachel tells me you worked in accounting your whole life. That must have been steady. It was more than steady, I said, cutting a piece of turkey. Numbers tell stories if you know how to listen. Dr. Harlan smiled politely. In medicine, we like our numbers hard and clean. No room for interpretation. In accounting, they either add up or they don't, I replied. No gray areas. Greg jumped in from his end. Unless you're using software. Then you just press a button and pray. Isn't that right, Virginia? I didn't flinch. Principles don't go out of style, Greg. Honesty still matters. Reed lifted his head slightly, listening. Greg noticed and quickly turned the conversation toward the clinic's upcoming expansion. The table talk shifted to vacation plans, office gossip, holiday recipes. I ate quietly, feeling the tension build like a snowbank against a closed door. As dessert plates were cleared, Rachel stood holding a champagne glass. Before we continue, she said, I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. Greg and I are grateful to be surrounded by such wonderful company. And she paused with a glance at me. We have an announcement. This spring, we're planning a month-long trip to Europe. Paris, Rome, Barcelona. I stared at her, unsure if she was serious. A month in Europe. With what money? Rachel caught my expression. What, Mom? She asked, her voice sharpening. Do you have something to say? Everyone turned toward me. No, dear, I said, softly. That sounds lovely. You look like you're thinking something, she pushed. Go on, say it. Greg leaned back in his chair, smirking. Don't hold back, Virginia. You always have an opinion. Rachel's voice was rising now. You've never approved of anything I've done. Not Greg, not our house, not our life. Rachel, I said we should talk about this another time. No, she said. Let's talk about how you always made me feel small. How you showed up at school in that old coat. How you embarrassed me in front of my friends. How you never let me forget where we came from. Greg placed a hand on her shoulder, not in comfort, but as if claiming the moment. You said you loved me, Rachel continued. But you never accepted me. You always thought we were doing something wrong. I never said that. I just... Reed was writing furiously now. Nora, Rachel's boss, exchanged a glance with Dr. Harland. The room had gone cold despite the candlelight. I think I'll be going, I said, folding my napkin. Rachel laughed bitterly. Of course. Walk away. That's what you do. She followed me to the hallway. Greg came too, staying just behind her. I invited you out of pity, Rachel hissed. Not because I wanted you here. I never wanted you here. I reached for my coat. Rachel, please. There's nothing you can say, she snapped. Whatever you think you know about Greg, it doesn't matter. You're just bitter. You've never been a real mother to me. She opened the door wide. You're not family anymore. I stepped outside. The cold slapped my face. The snow had started again. Behind me, I heard Greg laughing softly. I walked to the car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the house. I thought about the bracelet in my purse, the wine unopened, the words still burning in my ears. Then I picked up the phone and called Aiden. Virginia, he answered. No more delays, I said. It's time. The ride home from Rachel's house was quiet. Snow brushed against the windshield like dust from an old curtain, and the streetlights cast long shadows across the road. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't need to hear music or chatter. My hands stayed firm on the wheel, but my mind kept drifting back to the porch. The sound of that door slamming, her voice raised the look on Greg's face when he knew he'd won. At home, I hung my coat carefully and left the gift on the entry table. I moved through the house without turning on more lights than I needed. The living room, was still the Christmas cards still sitting unopened in the basket near the window. I stood by the tree, a modest thing I'd put up with care earlier in the week. The ornaments were old but clean, the lights warm but steady. I unplugged them and went to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down at the table. My phone buzzed once an alert from the local news app. The headline came through quickly: Eau Claire police investigate auto shop for possible theft ring. It didn't name Greg, but it wouldn't take long. I imagined phones buzzing all over town, heads turning, conversations changing. The next morning, I woke before the sun. I went through my routine, dressed in layers, boots, laced tight scarf tucked in. Outside, the sky was overcast, and the sidewalks still held last night's snow. I started my walk toward Water Street. The streets were quiet, but not still. A few neighbors were out early, sweeping steps or walking dogs. One or two nodded to me, maybe a little longer than usual. At the corner, I passed the florist, who gave me a small smile but didn't wave. Back at home, I turned on the television. They were showing footage from outside Greg's shop. Police officers stood near the open garage bay. A truck with a city emblem backed into the lot. The reporter's voice came through clear. "No arrests yet, but the investigation is active, and sources say the owner may be connected to a string of thefts involving dismantled vehicles sold for parts." I turned the volume down. I already knew the rest. Around noon, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Lorna Maddox on my porch, holding a small container wrapped in foil. "Brought you something," she said. "Cranberry bread. Still warm." I stepped aside to let her in. She moved quietly, hanging her coat and slipping off her boots. "I saw the news," she said. "Everyone's talking." I figured they would. I heard from Nadine at the post office. Her niece was at the dinner. I didn't answer. I poured tea while Lorna set the bread on a plate. She said Rachel lost it, yelled at you, in front of everyone. I nodded once. She told me I wasn't family anymore. Lorna winced, folding her hands. People forget themselves when they're scared. We sat in silence for a while. The tea steamed in our cups. Outside, a few flakes of snow started falling again. Lorna didn't press me for more. That afternoon, I went through my files. Old tax records, property documents, photos from Greg's first years at the shop. I laid out what I had, organizing them with slow, steady hands. Then I called Aiden. "It's moving quickly," he said. "We've already found more than we expected. Titles, plates, fake invoices. Some of them match reports from 3 counties. Do you think she knew?" "We don't have proof either way," he said. "But right now, we're treating her as a witness." Later that evening, I stepped out onto the porch. The air had turned bitter again, and the wind picked up down the street. I looked across the road at the lights in the Martinsons' front window. Their youngest had strung blinking blue bulbs around the porch rail. I leaned against the railing for a while, listening to the wind and the sound of my own breath. By midnight, I was just about to turn in when the doorbell rang. I checked the peephole and saw Rachel on the other side. Her coat was unzipped, her hair loose, and her face pale and drawn. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. "Mom," she said, her voice soft and shaky. I didn't know where else to go. She stood there for a moment before adding, "They sealed the house. I don't even have a key to get in." I looked at her for a moment longer, then stepped back to let her pass. She walked in without saying another word. I closed the door and locked it. "You can stay in the guest room," I said. "Blankets are already on the bed." She nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Thank you." We didn't say anything else. She disappeared down the hall, and I stood there, the quiet pressing in around me. The next few days passed slowly. Rachel stayed mostly in the room, sleeping late and skipping meals. I left breakfast out each morning, but the dishes stayed untouched. On the third morning, I knocked softly on her door. "You need to eat," I said. "There's oatmeal on the stove." She didn't answer, but I heard her stir. That afternoon, she came downstairs. She looked tired, but more put together. Her hair was tied back, and she wore an old sweatshirt I hadn't seen in years. "I'm going to the courthouse tomorrow," she said. "They need a statement." I nodded. "Do you need a ride?" "No," she said, "but I could use your help afterward, if that's all right." "We'll see," I said. That night, she sat at the kitchen table while I washed the dishes. She didn't say much, just sat quietly. After a while, she asked, "Have you talked to Greg?" "No," I said. "I don't think I could even look at him." I didn't answer. I wiped the counter dry and turned off the light. The following morning, she left early. When she returned, she brought in a thick folder and set it on the table. "They say my accounts are frozen. The house is going under review. They may seize it." I sat down across from her. "The lawyer said if I cooperate fully and prove I didn't know, there's a chance I can salvage something." I waited. "I need to get a job," she said. "Start over." I nodded once. "I don't expect anything from you, Mom," she added. I don't know where to begin." "You start where everyone starts," I said. "You start with what's left." She gave a slow nod and rested her hands on the table. Outside, the sun was already setting. The sky turned pale blue, and frost settled on the porch railing again. She didn't apologize. Not yet. But something in her voice had changed. A weariness, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. Tomorrow, she'd face more of it. And so would I. Rachel spent most of January moving from room to room without saying much. She'd leave early for appointments with her lawyer, or court briefings, come home in the evening, then retreat to the guest room. I let her be. Meals were left out, clean towels folded near the bathroom. She never asked for anything, but I could see the weight on her shoulders deepening each day. On a Thursday morning, she walked into the kitchen and stood near the sink while I poured coffee. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Mom, I talked to Greg's lawyer yesterday." I turned, waiting. "He's refusing a plea deal. Thinks he can fight it." I didn't respond right away. "They found parts from 23 cars in the shop," she added. "They have pictures, receipts, and now the DA's talking about conspiracy charges." She reached for a mug and filled it halfway. She didn't add sugar. She didn't sit down. They froze everything she said. Our accounts, the car, even the furniture's flagged. They said the mortgage was paid with laundered money. I nodded once, letting the news settle. "I need to find a job," she said almost to herself. I didn't say anything for a while. The heater kicked on in the corner, humming quietly as the vents warmed the room. "You'll need references," I said. Rachel looked over at me. "I've got Nora, and Dr. Harlan said he'd confirm I was never involved in the shop. You'll also need stability," I added. "Someplace to live." "I can't stay here forever," she said. "No," I said. "You can't." She looked down into her coffee and nodded. Later that afternoon, she came back from a walk with a folder tucked under her arm. She opened it on the kitchen table and showed me a flyer. "There's a hiring notice at a boutique near the edge of town. Administrative work part-time. I'm going to apply tomorrow." "Good," I said. "It's a start." She hesitated, then slid a second sheet of paper across the table. It was a draft of a business proposal. Something small. A bookkeeping and admin service. She said we could run from my house. She talked about online scheduling, offering services to retirees and local shops. She'd done the research, had quotes from 2 software providers, and even sketched a sample logo. She finished explaining and looked at me. I thought maybe it could be something we build together. It would help me show the court that I'm trying to establish a legal independent life, and I'd pay rent once I got stable. I folded the flyer and set it down beside my cup. Rachel, I said, this isn't about your paperwork or what the judge sees. She waited, hands resting lightly on the folder. I won't start something that comes from panic or desperation. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again. You're not ready, I continued, and I won't put my name on anything until you are. She nodded slowly and gathered the pages. The next few days were quiet. Rachel didn't bring up the proposal again. She started volunteering at the public library in the afternoons and walking to town instead of driving. I noticed the change not in her clothes or her posture, but in how she listened more than she talked. She didn't interrupt. She didn't try to explain every silence. One evening, I walked into the living room to find her dusting the mantel. She paused at an old photo of her as a child, sitting on the back steps in overalls, holding a sandwich with both hands. I'd taken that picture after her first day of kindergarten. She looked at it for a while and said, I remember thinking this was the biggest sandwich I'd ever seen. I smiled, and she turned slightly. You packed it in foil. We had those little juice boxes with the silver tops. Juicy juice, I said. Apple. She nodded and kept dusting. On a rainy Tuesday, she came home with a folded envelope in her hand. They offered me the job, she said. Starts Monday. That's good, I said. I'll be able to start looking for my own place in a few weeks. Let me know if you need help with first month's rent. She paused, then said, Thank you. She moved out 3 weeks later. I helped her load up the back seat of a borrowed sedan with 2 suitcases, a desk lamp, and a box of kitchen things I'd saved for her. We hugged on the porch, and she gave a faint smile before pulling out of the driveway. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty guest room across the hall. I didn't turn on the light. I just stood there for a minute, then walked back to the kitchen. I made tea and turned on the radio. The local news was running a segment about recent business closures in town. Then they moved on to Greg's case charges, officially filed a court date set for early spring. The reporter's voice was steady as she read from the bulletin. I took a long sip of tea, set the mug down, and walked to the back door. The wind had picked up again. I stepped outside and stood on the steps. The clouds were thinning. Above the roofline, I could see the faint outline of stars beginning to return. 2 weeks after Rachel moved into her apartment, I received a letter in the mail, hand-written, carefully folded, and sealed in one of the thank you card envelopes I kept in the hallway drawer. The return address was hers. I opened it at the kitchen table just after my morning walk. The note inside was brief. She wanted to meet for coffee. No mention of business or favors or what came next. Just coffee. We agreed to meet at Eleanor's Cafe, a small place near the courthouse with quiet booths and good pie. I arrived a little early and chose a table by the window. Rachel came in wearing a navy coat I didn't recognize. She looked rested, and there was a calmness to her that hadn't been there before. She sat across from me, pulled off her gloves, and folded them in her lap. Thanks for coming, she said. I nodded and waited. I've been thinking a lot about Christmas, she said, and everything before that. What I said, what I didn't say. The waitress came by and took our order, 2 coffees, 1 slice of lemon pie to share. Rachel waited until she was gone. I was wrong to throw you out, she said. I knew it as soon as the door closed. I just didn't know how to undo it. I stirred cream into my coffee, letting her speak. Greg told me for years that you looked down on us, that you didn't believe in what we were building. He said you were stuck in your ways, and that you resented how fast things changed. She paused, then added, and I believed him. I let him convince me you were the one holding me back. I looked out the window for a moment, The square was quiet, just a few people walking between shops. Rachel leaned forward. I thought if I could prove we were successful, you'd finally respect me. But the truth is, I was chasing something that didn't mean much in the end. Not compared to what I've lost. I met her eyes and said, You didn't lose me, Rachel. You pushed me away. She nodded quietly. I know, she said. And I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I just want to find something honest between us again. Whatever that looks like. The pie arrived, and we sat in silence for a few minutes, each taking small bites. The lemon was tart, the crust warm. She set her fork down and reached into her coat pocket, pulling out a folded slip of paper. I've been going to a women's group on Wednesday nights, she said. They help with budgeting, job coaching, even some counseling. I've been working through a lot of things. I took the paper and read through it, names, meeting times, notes about topics discussed. I'm proud of you for going, I said. She smiled, not wide, but sincere. On the walk back to my car, I thought about the quiet effort behind Rachel's words. Not dramatic, not defensive, just steady steps forward. That Sunday, I found myself stopping by the library during one of her shifts. She was behind the desk, checking in a stack of returns. She looked up when she saw me, but didn't wave, just nodded. I nodded back. It was enough. The town was beginning to talk less about Greg and more about spring. Snow was melting in patches along the sidewalks, and the first crocuses had started to peek up in front of the courthouse lawn. The city council released their quarterly budget update, and to my surprise, there was a handwritten note at the bottom of the letter. We'd like your input. Virginia, I started attending the budget meetings again just once a month. Nothing formal. I offered insight where I could help to flag errors in some of the projected reports. Folks listened when I spoke. A few of the newer council members asked me to look over older ledgers to spot inconsistencies. On one afternoon walk, I ran into Nora Finch outside the post office. She paused when she saw me adjusting the strap of her purse. Virginia, she said, I've been meaning to speak to you. I stopped beside the bench and waited. I owe you an apology for not stepping in that night at Rachel's. I should have said something. I shook my head. That wasn't yours to fix, I told her. Rachel and I had to get there on our own. Still, she looked regretful. She's changed, she said. We all see it at the clinic. She's quieter, more measured. I think she's learning. I hope so, I said. That week, Rachel stopped by the house with a small bag of groceries. Just basics, bread, eggs, tea. I thought you might be out, she said. I'm fine, I replied, but I took them anyway. She stood in the doorway, hands tucked into her coat sleeves. I'll be testifying next month, she said. They want my full account. I nodded. I'm not scared of telling the truth anymore, she added. Good, I said. You shouldn't be. Before she left, she hesitated. I don't want anything from you, she said. I just wanted you to know I'm still here. I watched her walk down the steps, her gait steady, her shoulders back. That night, I reread the letter she'd written after moving out. I hadn't thrown it away. I kept it in the drawer beside the bed, along with old birthday cards and a photo of her on her 5th birthday. It wasn't a full repair, not yet, but the threads were there, delicate and new. Spring would arrive slowly, the way it always did in Eau Claire. Bit by bit. Quietly at first, then all at once. Greg's trial began in early April. Eau Claire was shedding the last of its winter, but the courthouse steps were still slick in the mornings. I walked by once during jury selection and saw 2 reporters from out of town waiting near the security line. They didn't recognize me. I kept moving. Rachel called me the night before she was scheduled to testify. Her voice was steady, but she paused often between thoughts. She said the prosecutor had gone over her statement 3 times, each time circling back to the same questions: what she knew when she knew it, and whether she ever moved money on Greg's behalf. She said no to all of it. Still, they needed her under oath. I just wanted to hear your voice before tomorrow, she said. You'll be fine, I told her. Just tell the truth. She thanked me and we hung up. The next day, I stayed home. I kept the TV off, turned the phone ringer down. I baked banana bread and walked around the block twice. By mid-afternoon, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat on the edge of my bed, with the radio turned low, waiting for the sound of a car in the driveway. It didn't come. Instead, she called again around 5. It's done, she said. How did it go? I told them everything she said. What Greg said over the years, what he kept from me, how I ignored the signs. The assistant DA said it helped. I could hear her exhale. They called it substantial cooperation. Said it might mean the court will unfreeze some of my assets once this is over. That's good, I said. I don't know if it changes anything between us, she added. But I wanted you to know. It was the first time she hadn't asked for reassurance. Just wanted me to know. That mattered. 3 days later, I ran into Aiden Clark outside the town hall. He was dressed in plain clothes, no badge, just a windbreaker, and his usual quiet watchfulness. You heard about Greg? He asked. I nodded. Jury came back fast. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing next month. They're pushing for 8 to 10. He paused. Rachel testified well. It helped. She held up under cross. I nodded again. You raised someone who doesn't break easy, he said. She didn't get that from Greg, I answered. Aiden smiled, then asked if I had a few minutes. We walked over to the cafe near the park. He ordered coffee black. I got tea. I've been meaning to ask you something, he said as we sat. All right. The mayor's office wants to form a public oversight group. Budget transparency, community planning, things like that. They asked for names. I gave them yours. I stirred my tea. You've been here longer than anyone on that council, he said, and folks trust you. I'll think about it, I said. He nodded. That's all I ask. I walked home afterward through the square. The trees were starting to leaf out and the breeze carried the smell of damp mulch and tulips. That weekend, Rachel showed up on my porch without calling first. She held a small paper bag and wore a denim jacket over a floral dress. I brought something, she said. From the farmer's market. She handed me the bag. Inside were 2 sweet rolls still warm. I thought we could have breakfast, she added. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She talked about work, the store's new inventory system, how she'd started biking to save on gas. She didn't ask for anything, didn't hint at plans, just ate her roll, drank her coffee, and listened when I spoke. After a while, she stood. I know I've said a lot and I know you're still cautious, she said. But thank you for not giving up on me completely. I walked her to the door. We're not where we used to be, I said, but we're here. She smiled. That's something. When she left, I stood by the window for a while, looking out over the porch steps she used to run down as a little girl. That night, I opened the drawer beside my bed again. The letter she'd written me months ago was still there. I read it once more, then folded it carefully and placed it behind the photo of her 5th birthday. I wasn't ready to throw it away, but I no longer needed to keep it at the top of the pile. Spring had come quietly this year. Not with fanfare, but with gentleness. The kind that stays. By early May, the sentencing hearing was scheduled. Rachel didn't ask if I'd come with her, and I didn't offer. Some things you walk through on your own. She called the night before. Her voice a little slower than usual, like the words were being measured twice before spoken. I'm testifying again, she said. They want a victim statement. Not just about Greg, but about the damage. Do you know what you're going to say? Mostly, she said. I've been writing it in pieces. It still doesn't feel real. I told her I'd be thinking of her. She didn't cry, just said thank you, and hung up. The next morning, I worked in the yard, trimmed the boxwood, swept the porch, cleaned out the clay pots under the stairs. I didn't check the news, didn't call anyone. By afternoon, I sat on the back step with a cup of water and watched a robin picking through the grass. Around 5, Rachel pulled into the driveway. She didn't get out right away. Just sat there for a moment, then opened the car door and walked over. "He got 9 years," she said, sitting beside me. I nodded. "They'll transfer him to the state facility next week. His lawyer tried for 7. The judge didn't budge." "Did you read your statement?" She nodded. I told them I was blind, that I confused ambition with safety, that I let myself believe the money meant we were doing something right. We sat in silence for a while. The yard smelled like soil and early lilacs. "He didn't look at me," she said. "Not once." "You didn't need him to," I said. She stayed until the light began to fade. Before she left, she turned to me. "There's one more thing." I waited. I had some of the jewelry appraise the things Greg gave me. Most of it wasn't bought legitimately, but 2 pieces were clean. I sold them. She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is for you," she said. "It's not to pay you back." I could never do that. It's just to say thank you. For the roof over my head, for the groceries, for not turning away completely. I didn't open it. I just took it from her hand and nodded. After she left, I placed the envelope in the desk drawer, but didn't count the bills. It wasn't about the amount. 2 days later, I received a call from the mayor's office. They confirmed my appointment to the new oversight board. The meetings would begin in June. Nothing flashy, just quiet reviews of line items, grant requests, public infrastructure spending. When the news became public, a few people stopped me on the sidewalk. One of them was Tom Ridley, the retired high school principal. "About time they gave you a seat at the table," he said, tipping his cap. That Sunday, I returned to the library. I hadn't taken a shift since winter, but the director had called to ask if I'd be willing to help with a new volunteer program pairing young women with retired professionals for mentorship. I said yes. When I arrived, Rachel was at the front desk logging returns. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. "You're on the calendar," she said. "I made sure your hours are clear." I signed in and walked toward the reading room. The shelves smelled like paper and lemon oil. Light poured through the tall windows. I sat in one of the chairs by the reference desk and waited for the girl I'd been assigned to. Her name was Mia, a senior from the high school, with plans to study business. When she arrived, she was quiet, unsure. She sat with her hands folded tight and her questions written down. I let her settle in before we began. We started with basic spreadsheets, budgets, basic forecasting. But as we talked, I could see the worry in her face soften. She was listening. Later that week, Rachel stopped by my house with a box of old ledgers. She said the library was clearing space and wanted to know if I'd help sort what should be archived. We worked in the dining room for hours, dusting off covers, scanning dates. Somewhere in the middle of a faded binder from the late 80s, she paused and looked at me. "I'm not sure I ever said this directly," she said. "But I'm sorry for the way I treated you, for all the times I let Greg speak for me." I set my pencil down. "I know," I said, but I needed to say it out loud. "You just did." She reached for the next ledger, and we kept working. There was no dramatic pause, no tearful embrace, just 2 women at a dining table surrounded by numbers and pages and the slow work of repair. That night, I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of tea. The air smelled like cut grass. The streetlights flickered on one by one. I sat on the top step and watched the neighborhood settle into quiet. Some nights, the pain still flickered, but it didn't take hold the way it used to. Rachel had started down her own road. I wasn't leading her anymore, and she wasn't dragging me behind. We were just walking each in our own lane, sometimes parallel, sometimes not. And for the first time in years, that was enough. By the time summer arrived in Eau Claire, the rhythm of life had shifted into something quieter, steadier. The trial was behind us, the headlines faded. Greg was serving his sentence. Rachel was working full-time at the store and had joined the Thursday night budgeting group as a volunteer. We spoke once or twice a week now, sometimes about nothing at all, just the weather or a good recipe. Other times, she'd stop by with a bag of groceries or sit with me on the porch, both of us watching the evening settle over the trees. One morning, I found a small envelope on my front porch tucked beneath the mat. Inside was a card with a picture of hydrangeas and a short note in Rachel's handwriting. Mom, I signed up for an accounting course, just one night a week. Thought it was time I understood the numbers instead of just pretending to. Love you. I stood there for a long moment, holding the card in both hands. It wasn't the course that mattered. It was the shift behind it, the understanding that growth didn't always mean distance. Sometimes it meant turning back toward the people who'd stood steady when everything else fell apart. Later that month, I was asked to speak at a town meeting. Nothing formal, just a few words about the new budget oversight group. Afterward, as I was gathering my things, the mayor stopped me at the door. We're lucky to have your voice in the room, he said. You bring something the rest of us don't. Just experience, I told him. No, he said. You bring conscience. I walked home slowly that evening, the sound of cicadas filling the spaces between street lights. The town hadn't changed much, not really. But I had. Somewhere in the last few months, I stopped looking back with regret. I'd done what I could. I told the truth when it mattered. And when the time came, I let go of what needed letting go. Rachel and I weren't perfect, and we weren't trying to be. We were just showing up, quietly, day after day. That was enough. I still walk every morning at 6:30 sharp. Still pass the courthouse and the post office. Most mornings, I nod to the same familiar faces. Sometimes, they stop me just to talk, ask about a council vote, or share a memory from years back. I listen. I remember. There was a time I thought justice looked like something big headlines, courtrooms, dramatic apologies. But now I think it looks more like this, a daughter returning with nothing but the truth in her hands. A porch light left on, not out of obligation, but hope. A woman choosing dignity even when no one's watching. If you've ever had to choose between protecting someone and protecting yourself, I hope this story gave you something to hold on to. And if you're still walking through the aftermath of someone else's choices, keep walking. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story spoke to you, feel free to share it or leave a comment. I'll be right here same time tomorrow.